Hi, so my name is Matt. I'm here at the 2014 NAMM show with Sonic State and iZotope, and we're looking at Brake Tweaker. So Brake Tweaker is the newest collaboration between iZotope and BT. We formerly did Stutter Edit together, and it's brand new. It came out yesterday, first day of the show. So what is it? It's a few different things. Essentially, it's a drum machine. So we have the traditional sequencing with a few little extra special things that I'll show you. It's a drum instrument. You know, we have to design the sound, so it comes with a bunch of great content and a synth. And also it's got BT's famous MicroEdit, so you can do all these kind of glitchy EDM drum beats and so on. So I guess I'll just play a few presets so you can kind of get a sense of how it sounds, and then I'll show you like what's going on underneath. So, you know, it's kind of an EDM-centric drum machine for sure, but what have we got going on? So I'm going to start with the sequencer view, because you might say, yeah, it's a sequencer, you know, everything's got a sequencer, but there's a few really, really cool things in it. So it's a 32-step sequencer, 6 tracks, but what you'll notice here is that we have these things labeled speed, because when we were thinking about sequencing and how we could kind of make it a little bit more exciting, we figured out if BT said, well, let's just give every track its own speed. So for instance, here I have this track and I have this hi-hat that's just going along, ticking along. So I could actually give that hi-hat track a different speed, let's say 2/3 the speed of everything else. And what that means is that everything starts happening isorhythmically. So we start getting these really cool kind of glitching beats that evolve over time. Just simple tweaks like that to the sequencing view. We also can adjust the step length. So if I don't want 32 steps, you know, I can adjust it to 31 or 30. And so now if I play back, you know, I've got this isorhythmic hi-hat that's just going all over my beat. And it's always going to be in a different place. So I can kind of build all these different patterns, these different drum beats, and they're always going to be exciting and evolving, and it might take, you know, 5 minutes before it cycles back around to where it began. But of course we have to have sounds to sequence. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to actually go back and make a new preset, just so we can kind of start from scratch. I'm going to put in a sort of a kick snare pattern, and I'll start with the kick real fast. So basically each track has up to 3 generators, 3 layers. And each of those generators can be either a synth or a one-shot sample loader. So I'm going to start by loading in a one-shot sample, because that's going to give me a chance to talk about our content library. And I'm going to layer in a snare as well, a one-shot snare. So, you know, when we were making this and we were thinking about EDM producers in general, or electronic musicians, people always ask that question, how do I get that snare, that kick? Because really the secret, as we know, is heavy layering. So you might have 5 snares layered with a sine wave and some distortion and some filtering just to get that full bandwidth snare sound that people use in these productions. And we actually did that in pre-production. So all these one-shots, and there's about 2 gigs of one-shots, so there's hundreds and hundreds of one-shots. They've all been layered and pre-mixed. So if you hear this now, all I've done is load in 2 samples, but it already sounds like a complete production. You know, that's a pretty powerful snare. I can extend it, I can pull that step out so it sounds a little more full. I can add, you know, just to the right of our samples, we have a bunch of distortions taken from iZotope's Trash 2, a really well-known distortion plugin. I can add some warm tube-based distortion to the kick. Now it's sounding a lot more full. So okay, you know, we've got a bunch of really great content, a bunch of one-shot samples you can kind of load in and build beats really quick, but I also mentioned there's a synth. So I'm going to look at that now. So I go to track 3, I'm going to drag out this step, and I'm going to say, you know what, let's call this one a synth. It loads up, it looks like a basic sine wave, and to begin with, sure it is. But these oscillators are what we call morphing wavetable oscillators, and what I mean by that, if you take a look, I can actually sweep through a wavetable of my sine wave and get a bunch of really unique waveforms that you wouldn't get in a traditional oscillator, and they sound pretty fun. I'm going to lower that, get some bass going. And we have a ton of different wavetables. So if I, just in my basic category alone, I could select my square wavetable. I mean, this is not a square wave that you usually see in any other synthesizer, and it's really fun to sweep through. Now, everyone I show that to says, I want to automate that. I want to modulate that. Well, you can. So I can apply an LFO to that, and now we're going to be sweeping through these different textures. So that's pretty fun. I mean, there's a lot of interesting textures. If I just maybe make another layer here, I can even show you some of the advanced wavetables that we have. So for instance, we have like speak and spell wavetables, kind of like kind of have like vocal formant, so you can kind of make it talk. We also have like, you know, this is one oscillator that's making this sound. It's a little crazy, a little over the top, but hey, that's what people want. So I'm actually just going to go back, turn that off, go back to our original synth that we had. I'm modulating that waveform with the LFO, and that's something else that's really fun to talk about as well. You know, LFOs, everyone's like, yeah, everything has an LFO. But if you look at the LFO, we don't just have the traditional LFO waveforms, we have all of these crazy LFO shapes that you've never seen in an LFO before. So you get some really interesting rhythmic textures. And you know, once you start adding multiple oscillators, and you can do additive synthesis, you can do ring mod, AM, FM, and so on, you start getting some really interesting sounds. You know, and that's two oscillators, basic FM, but you can actually modulate the FM, have that moving as well. And remember, there's no distortion on this synth yet, but let's do that. So we can put some distortion on, and that's pretty fun. So okay, we've got some content in there, got the samples, got the synth. The last thing to show, and this is really the key, this is what Rate Tweaker is all about. We have this thing called the MicroEdit View. So if I select any given step in my sequencer, this window down here becomes active. And this is essentially a granular synthesis tool for each individual sequencer step. So, you know, if I want to cut my snare drum on beat 4 into 3 pieces, I just do that. So you can introduce syncopation and cross rhythms, you know, to the sequencer that you couldn't usually do. But because it's BT, we can go, you know, to a more granular level. And then we can actually start adding tensions and curves to get some really exciting sweeps. So I'm adding, you know, some tension here with this little tool. So that in itself, that's pretty fun. And you can apply these microedits obviously to the percussive sounds, but I can apply it to the synth as well. And because it's granular, we can actually put it in pitch mode and say, you know what? This synth sound here on this sequence step, I'm going to cut it granularly so that it's going to be note, let's say, A flat 1. And now it doesn't matter what pitch my oscillators are at, the microedit's going to be cutting it to A flat. And so if I go back to my synth generators, check what happens now. No matter what pitch of the oscillator is, the microedit's going to cut it granularly to A flat 1, and we get some really interesting textures. So of course I can automate that as well with an LFO. Maybe not quite that high. So, you know, it's really, really fun, and if that distortion is a little bit too much for you, if you need to just kind of clean things up, then we also have these filters right here, a New York and a Tokyo filter. All I'll say is that they're modeled after something that came from New York and something that came from Tokyo. They sound awesome. A lot of drums go through those synth filters. And of course you can automate those too and get some really interesting textures happening. And you know, that's one oscillator. We're not layering stuff, but we could. It comes with a ton of presets made by people like Richard Devine, AU5, BT. A bunch of us at iZotope were busy making presets. And the presets themselves sound like full productions. I mean, we have minimal presets. We have some really retro presets with some of the vintage drum samples, which is good fun. And of course, we have a lot of these dubstep presets with some really, really interesting sounds. And a lot of those micro edits. You can hear them all kind of micro editing around. And let's say we wanted to take that step and do that sweep that we did again. So in a nutshell, that's Brake Tweaker. It's a lot of fun. We're definitely excited about it. It's out now. There's Brake Tweaker. There's Brake Tweaker Expanded, which is just Brake Tweaker plus 3 additional content libraries. Kicks and snares by Beatport Sounds. So if you like what you hear on Beatport, you'll like the kicks and snares they gave us. You know, there's a vintage machine cinematic expansion. So there's a lot in there. It's pretty deep, but it's super easy to use. It's a lot of fun.
So how much is it?
So the right now it's $199. The price goes up to $249 after February 19th, 2014, depending on when this video goes out. So.
And I noticed you were playing different things across different keys.
Yeah.
What's going on with that then?
So I can actually show you this little diagram right here. Basically, we have one-shot samples, so we can listen to each of the tracks just by hitting those keys, C1 and up. And then if we want to launch patterns, because you know it's a drum machine, we've got up to 24 patterns, we launch those patterns with these MIDI keys. So that's just the way that, you know, from your DAW, you can trigger all those different patterns and sounds and kind of build up your productions that way. And even though these sound pretty full and they're kind of really well mixed, there are multi-outs, so you can send each track to a different output and then mix it a little bit more, add some reverb and that sort of stuff. So.
And it's standard plugin formats, right?
It's AU, VST, AAX, RTAS, so all the standard plugin formats, 32 and 64-bit. So yeah, go crazy.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.